I'd like to speak this morning about something very basic and fundamental to the practice, but not often given adequate emphasis. And I believe that why it doesn't is because it has the possibility of creating an enormous disturbance. And so in order to sort of keep from that disturbance, we refrain from the subject. But I'm not one to avoid disturbance. So I would like to speak, if I could, about basic perception itself. If worldly perception made you spiritual, it would be a very harmonious world, would it not? But the perceptions the way we organize perception from a worldly sense is simply misperceived. We misperceive what life is. We hold it to be something that it isn't, and then act upon that misperception towards our own personal gain and acquisition. So to come in to your spiritual life and maintain a worldly perception is going to have you working worldly within a spiritual context. And those two are at odds with one another. So let's look at what I'm talking about here. When we look out of our eyes, I'm looking at something very noticeable. When we look out through our eyes, we see a very disconnected world. And because of that disconnection, we also see distance that we have to travel in order to connect or to have some sense of relationship with. There's a certain distance, psychic distance or physical distance. To sit down in a chair, I have to go to where the chair is. And there's also a time that's necessary for me to journey to get to that, to meet the requirements of covering that distance. And so the sense of disconnectedness lays a world out of time and distance and a journey and a duration. And we feel the rubs of that perception, which ultimately brings us in to a spiritual context. We want some way out of that rub. Yet most of us bring the contextual environment that caused the rub into our spiritual journey. We sit down and we perceive inwardly, because we have always perceived externally, disconnection. We orient our spiritual life in exactly the same way as we oriented our worldly one. We have a journey we need to make. I start here, which is disconnection, and I need to journey wherever our goal seems to indicate, which is the distance from me to where I need to go. And this may take a long time. I look around and see practitioners of many decades, and so then I assume it's going to take decades in myself as well. And so inwardly, the orientation is exactly the same as our external perceptions. It's just that we've marked the territory as a spiritual journey with a spiritual duration, at the end of which we'll have a spiritual connection. Not so much difference than going to school or walking to the lunch line, or doing the other many, many common chores that we do every day. And I believe that it is this perceptual orientation that is the difficulty, and that the spiritual journey is releasing ourselves from the fixation of that perception. Now that's a very different path than a path of duration, of time, and of trying to connect. If we are billiard balls, we're never going to connect. I don't care how much time you spend in samadhi or trying to weld yourself to whatever experience is occurring. If we conceive of ourselves as separate from is never going to be joined with. So that's either a basic misperception or we're wasting our time. Now, intuitively, each one knows that it's a basic misperception, that we're not wasting our time, that something inside of us is oriented to life, not in how we perceive it, but in something that is intuitively felt, that we don't give as much credence to as our mind's description, because that's not the cultural imperative that we have worked from. That's not the way the culture has inducted us. It's inducted us into time, distance, and disconnection. And so, of course, with that momentum of conditioning from whence we came, our spiritual journey is going to look pretty much the same, unless we really question those assumptions from the beginning. We have to seek a resonance with that intuitive sense in ourselves that is not disjoined, that is not of time, that is not far away, that is complete, harmonious, and immediate. And the strategies we use must be aligned with the truth we seek. We may think we're getting somewhere, but if we align ourselves with worldly perceptions, where we're going to get to is worldly goals. So what does a journey look like when we sober up? Not listening to the lineages of thousands of practitioners who have lived in accordance to the cultural perceptions of their time. But what does it look like when we take ourselves in a firm grip of reality? What does this journey mean to us? Where are we going with it? Now, we may want worldly pursuits out of our spiritual direction, and that's fine. You go ahead and pursue it. But that's not who I'm speaking to now. If we want to self-improve, that's a worldly pursuit. You're probably doing just exactly what you need to do in order to be calmer, quieter, more serene, and quite likely more concentrated. But that's not who I'm speaking to. I'm calling to the cavernous, the dark, the way back in there, the primal, that which knows what I'm saying, that which resonates and nods our head in accordance with where the words are stretching us. That part of you. Not the part of you that wants to be accomplished. That's the superficial part. That's the me part. Now, which part wants to play in this spiritual game? Which part wants to come forward? That's not for me to judge, but it's for you to determine. Because if the deepest area of ourselves wants to find its way out of the misperception, then we have to orient ourselves in that direction. We can't keep generating the same solutions to the same problems when those solutions were derived from the problem. Is the world disjoined? Isn't it obvious? And that isn't it equally as obvious the harder I try to join it, the more disjoined it seems? Is there really a huge distance between what I want for myself and what is available now? Or am I just misperceiving the destination as being far away? Something that I have to do penance in order to achieve. And we all hear that it's immediately accessible. Why do we keep structuring the journey in terms of every day and every year and every lifetime? Like we're walking up this enormous hill and we're thirsty, surrounded on either side by an oasis. What does it look like when we deny the truth of the perceptions that we have lived with? When we deny the disconnection that our eyes seem to indicate? When you move to your heart's orientation rather than to your mind's orientation. When you sense the proximity of everything, the interconnection of everything, where no distance could ever intervene. And the culmination is never far away. It's never a duration. But many of us make it hard because we don't want that new orientation. So again, we have to look at our intention for what we're doing. Because this new orientation disrupts your motivation, your worldly motivation of why we live at all. To gain, to acquire, to accomplish, to improve. It pulls the rug out from where we usually stand in terms of the meaning and direction we give the world. So we'd rather keep that in place, maintaining those perceptions, yet claim we're acting and working in a spiritual direction. So I leave that on your lap. I'm not here to please. I'm here to question.